Grade 12 Economics. Good afternoon. My name is Mr. Mhlongo. I'm back here with you today for Paper 1 revision. Remember, this lesson is brought to you by Gauteng Department of Education in collaboration with Cybono Discovery. Today, we are here to ensure that we put the final stamp as we prepare for the paper that will be written tomorrow at 9 o'clock. The paper for tomorrow is Paper 1, which mainly consists of macroeconomics. So please join me so that we can see what I have for you in the pocket. Okay, so today the main objective is to ensure that we cement our revision for this term as we do Paper 1. The topic that we are considering, and that will be considered in a question paper for tomorrow, is mainly macroeconomics topics, circular flow, business cycles, public sector, and the foreign exchange market. All questions will be distributed across these topics. So please ensure that you are prepared. The good thing about this thing is that you are redoing the same thing. Remember, for term 1, you were assessed on macroeconomics. Again, now you will be assessed on macroeconomics. There will be nothing new, just that you just have to understand your content from the beginning to the end. So firstly, we have to give you the training. We have to guide you on how you should be approaching the question paper, because most of you are not fully informed about how to access the question paper, how to attempt the question paper. Sometimes we have that knowledge, we have studied, but you don't have a strategy on how to ensure that that 2 hours given to you is used accordingly. The choice of questions is also done in a proper way. Time consumption is also done in a proper way. So that is very important for us to ensure that we give you guidance so that you will be efficient across the question paper. So approaching the question paper, you need to read questions and understand the question before attempting to answer. We know that you still have that sentiment of grade 11 where you rush to answer and leave the exam room. This time around, this thing is not working in grade 12. You need to ensure that you make use of your time efficiently. Every minute must be accounted for. You need to ensure that you use your time accordingly. So it is very important for you, given the question paper, to read each question with understanding before you attempt to answer. There is nothing to rush, but ensure that you complete all questions that you have chosen based on the given 2 hours. Avoid early excitement when reading the question statement, because you might provide irrelevant information. It is also important that to ensure that as you read the question, you read it once for the second time also to understand what is needed by the question. Do not just read the question once and be happy. We know people normally do that with an essay, where we come across an essay maybe talking about features underpinning forecasting, discussing detail all features underpinning forecasting, excluding indicators. The first answer become leading indicator. That is now wrong, because the statement said excluding indicators. So it is important that when you attempt to answer the question, you answer because you have understood the requirements of the question. Should you simply answer the question without understanding, you might be providing the answers that are irrelevant as for the question, even though they might be correct contextually, but for the question they are not needed. Do not guess in section A answers. So understand each question statement and relate to the given options. Remember, when you are doing section, especially 1.1, we are given 4 options. In those 4 options, 1 is related, 1 is absolutely correct, and 2 are wrong. So ensure that you choose the correct answer. Do not guess. Don't go in there and give us B, 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 A, A. Examiners are not that, they don't work in that way. They ensure that they balance their thing. So ensure that as you read the question statement, especially in 1.1, you eliminate, you do accordingly. You choose the correct answer over answers that are close or related. Choose the correct answer. So understand the question statement, provoke yourself to get an answer on your own before looking to the available options. After that, you can look in there and choose the correct answer. Also, you must not write the answer on top of another answer. If ever the answer that you have chosen is B, do not write C on top of B. That won't be visible. Like this, maybe you say the answer is B. After that, you notice, no, I'm wrong. You do this. So this thing is no longer visible now. You need to scratch the answer and ensure that you write the correct answer on the side. Another thing, do not give the marker or your educator an option. If the answer is C, give C. If the answer is D, give D. Do not say C/D. This thing won't be marked because now we are also giving back options that we're giving to you. So read data response with understanding while highlighting important information. It is very important that as you read giving data response in question 2, question 3, question 4, you ensure that each data response that you will be answering, you read, interpret with understanding. We know that you guys, especially if you are giving extract, you rush on picking in answers there that are irrelevant. Remember, the first two answers might be from the extract. 90% chances are they might be from the extract, especially 2.2.1, 2.2.2. But the rest is not from the extract. It requires your content knowledge. So it is important that you avoid copying the given extract even when it's irrelevant. You need to know that where should you, in which question number should you expect the answer to be from data response, and also in which question number should you expect to provide your content knowledge. So I'm telling you from today, from 2.2.3, 2.4, 2.2.5, up to question 3, up to question 4, those questions, they cannot be found in the data response. They cannot be found in the extract. You can just maybe analyze, but you cannot get an answer easily there. So it is important that you understand that as you go for the paper tomorrow, because most of you, we are still familiar with copying the extract as it is for all questions. And then improve your ability to link, because the question paper requires the most of linking. Our question papers lately do not mainly require that you list or mention. You need to link. For instance, the how question, why question, analyze question, evaluate question. That's when you have to link things in the examples will be shown to you. So ensure that you improve your ability to link, your ability to analyze, your ability to answer those how question, why question. That will help you, because most questions require that level of understanding and of answering. Be smart when answering application questions. When you answer application questions, like evaluation of some sort, it is very important that you note, if you evaluate something, you look at the good side and the bad side. Ensure that as you provide answers, you balance your answers. If ever you have like the unsuccessful part maybe of 3 answers, you must also look for a successful part also. Don't just give one-sided. Ensure that you balance your answering so that you can obtain maximum marks as you go for your question paper. Answer in full sentences. It is important that you answer in full sentences. Do not list where it's unnecessary. Especially for 2 marks question, you can't list. You have to answer in the full sentence. There is no way that you can be given the question for 2 marks, then especially without them saying list or mention, they say what impact, how, why, then you give one answer. So that will be wrong. You won't be credited for such. Maybe you can get 1 mark for listing if ever that will be credited for that particular question. So it is important that if the question requires explanation, you explain. You don't just list, because listing can lead to you forfeiting marks. And then we continue with approaching the question paper. Let mark allocation determine the time you can spend on each sub-question. It is important that you look at the mark allocation. So if ever the question requires you to provide, it requires 1 mark. There is 1 mark for the question. Obviously, you must list, identify, mention. If it's 2 marks, you need to spend a little bit of some time, because you have to explain. If it's 4 marks, you allocate even more time on that one, because you need to provide 2 facts, 2 full answers in two sentences, so that you can get your 4 marks if they are correct. If it's 8 marks, you have the minimum of 4 points in full sentences that are correct. You can go beyond the 4 points that are correct in full sentences. So it is important that you ensure that the mark allocation guides you on how much are you going to write or scribe for that particular question. Avoid leaving spaces in section A. Basically, in all sections, do not leave spaces. Should you choose the question, let's say you choose question 2, you answer all questions in question 2. Should choose question 3, answer all questions in question 3. If you choose question 4, answer all questions in question 4. If you choose question 5, do not switch additional parts between question 4 and question 5 and question 6, because should you do that, you will forfeit marks. For instance, maybe you choose to answer question 5, then you take additional part for question 6, you bring it in question 5. You won't be marked for that part of additional part. That will be wrong. Ensure ensure that as you choose the question, you commit yourself from the beginning of the question to the end of the question. In section A, do not leave spaces, because should you leave spaces, you will be forfeiting marks. Remember, this SPA mark is very important for you as you prepare for your final examination. Avoid answering all 3 questions in section B. This is another one. Do not answer all questions in section B. Section B requires you to choose only 2 questions. We are given question 2, question 3, and question 4. You choose only 2 questions to answer. Do not answer everything, because should you do so, that means there is a question where you are not going to do justice. So 2 questions are allowed to be answered, not 3, but you choose amongst the 3 questions. Do not answer everything in the question paper. Time allocated is not enough for you to complete everything. And remember, we are being assessed out of 150. So if you answer everything, that's something else. So ensure that you read your instructions on the second page with understanding. Then you can make your choices. Avoid answering both questions in section C. Obvious. Section C has 2 questions. You answer only one. It's question 5 and question 6. Answer only one question. Do not answer both. Be able to analyze and interpret graphs, cartoons, extract, and data in section B. Data response. It is important that given data response, because they will always be there, you are able to analyze, know where to expect what kind of the question in there, know the structure of the question paper as you go to the examination. That will give you that confidence. Know that if I talk about 2.1.1, it's a listing. If I talk about 2.1.2, it's a how question, what impact or why. So in that situation, you know what to expect. If you go to 2.2, first data response, 2.3 data response, 2.4 a discussion question for 8 marks, which is the content knowledge, 2.5 higher order question, but cannot be found, that cannot be found in the textbook. That's when you have to apply the content. So it is important for you to know that part of the information as you attempt your question paper, because should you just go and expect whatever, then you will lose everything. Do not write an essay. Do not write an essay that has not been asked. This one is also important. We have seen that even in term 1, candidates answering questions that were not asked. Do not come with your own essay. Like, that's my prayer. Do not come with your own essay. Essays will be provided that 2, question 5 and question 6. Then choose one. Don't bring your own essay. Now, that will be totally wrong. You won't get anything there. So avoid answering the question that has not been question in there. You must read the question, understand, answer the question. Do not bring your own essay. We know it's June examination. We'll be seeing that fashion if ever the essay of your favorite is not in the examination. Be able to list subheadings for each essay. It is important that you can list subheadings. Then after that, you can be able to fill in information in there, because if you cannot even list subheadings, that means you don't know what you are doing, especially with that particular essay. Have a brief description on each subheading for each essay. If you are given an essay, you have those subheadings, you need to give that information on each subheading so that you can score marks. Remember, the question paper is not only about essay. It's about from section A, section B, section C. All questions are important, and they all carry marks for you. So do not give a priority somewhere. Ensure that you give the priority in all sections of the question paper. Because if you ignore section B going for section C, then it will give you 40 marks, and then section B gives you 80 marks. Then you lose a lot. So ensure that you balance your performance in all sections, because even section A is important for you. Those are easy marks to get. Answers are in front of you. Ensure that you perform very well, minimum of 25 marks to 30. Then you know that you have nailed it. You go further to the next questions. Discuss the relevant content on each subheading. Ensure that you discuss content that is relevant, not irrelevant content. Then do not list points in additional part. Ensure that if we are doing additional part of your essay, you don't list, but you write in full sentences, because if ever you list, you will be getting the maximum of 2 marks if ever that listing is correct. Should it be wrong, you get 0. So ensure that you do the right thing. And also, as you write your essay, remember the IMAX strategy: introduction, main part, additional part, and conclusion. Follow that structure as you answer your essay. Do not mix things up. Then we go to the section B. Answer only 2 questions between 2, 3, and 4. That is important. And then use 10 minutes given time. Very much profitable. Ensure that to make right choices in the during that first 10 minutes before you start your examination, so that you go to the exam, you just approach it already, you have made your choices. Read each question with understanding before attempting to answer. That's a repeat. And then read data response with understanding, highlighting basic and important information. Improve your ability to link. I think that's a repetition also. And then be smart when you're answering application questions. And then answer in full sentences where you have to explain. These are short questions examples. For lower order, where you list, mention any two participants in the closed economy. So in this situation, households or consumers. We also have businesses or firms. We also have government or the state. So remember, in the closed economy, so that means we scrap the foreign sector. Should you provide the foreign sector? It's now wrong because this is the closed economy. Mention any two markets in the circular flow. That's a very simple thing. But now the challenge that we normally come across is student exam. You normally make mistakes. When they need participants, you mention markets. When they need markets, you mention participants. That's one of the challenges that we are having. They need injections to provide leakages. Ensure that you don't find yourself within the early excitement. Understand, calm down, then attempt to answer the question making sense. Mention any two markets in the circular flow. We have factor market, the product or goods market, and then we have financial markets, and then we also have what we call a foreign exchange market. We continue with the lower order questions where you don't have to discuss anything, you just have to list. Mention any two leakages in the circular flow: taxation, savings, and payment for imports. Those are the leakages. And then mention any two injections: obvious, investment spending, government spending, as well as payment for exports. Then we continue with the lower order. Mention two flows in the circular flow. So we have money flow, we have real flow. So remember, the same content that I'm mentioning here for lower order can be improved to the middle order up to the higher order. For instance, if we talk about maybe mention two participants in the circular flow, it can also go further to the point of analyze the importance of a particular participant in the economy for 8 marks or for 10 marks. So it is important that you upgrade your knowledge from the lower order, middle order, higher order. You need always to develop as you answer or attempting to answer the question, because you can find that in a certain instance you are not required to list, but you have to analyze. You must be able to answer the question. Then in this situation, they say mention two flows in the circular flow: money flow and the real flow. Then they can even say mention any two examples of money flow in the economy, or mention any two examples of real flow in the economy, or briefly define the term money flow, or briefly define the term real flow. Or it can go further to the point of differentiating between the money flow and the real flow for 8 marks. So it is important. Or they can say analyze the link or the connection between money flow and the real flow for 8 marks or 10 marks. So it is important that you always upgrade yourself, know the topic or each subtopic from the lower order to the higher order, so that you will be ready for the exam tomorrow. Mention any two examples of real flow in the circular flow. So a flow of goods and services, or a flow of factors of production. Then I think there's a lot in there: flow of goods and services, flow of factors of production, and then also we talk about the importation of goods, and which is also part of goods, and also the exportation. They all take the part of what? Of the real flow. List any two methods of calculating GDP. So we have 3 of them: income method, expenditure, and the production method. But remember, it is important that you understand each one of them, so that if ever the question goes further to 4 marks or 8 marks, you are able to answer the question. Also, even calculations are very important in this situation, because you have to calculate where necessary. If you are given the table, obviously you should be calculating something. Mention any two examples of indirect taxes. And then we have value-added tax, we have ad valorem tax, and then we have the sin tax. We have also import taxes. So it is also important for you to know the impact of taxation in the economy. How do taxes affect the economy? It can be a good way or the bad way. And also, it is important for you also to evaluate or analyze the impact of taxation on the size of the multiplier. Should the taxation be increasing, how does that affect the multiplier? Should it be decreasing, how does that affect the multiplier? Then we continue with the lower order. Mention any two instruments of the monetary policy. We have a challenge on this one. Whenever you're required to mention instrument of fiscal policy, you mention monetary policy. Monetary policy, you mention fiscal policy. So it is important that you are able to draw the line between fiscal policy instruments as well as the monetary policy instruments. Remember, it is also necessary for you to ensure that you understand you know the definition of repo rate as it's given here, repo rate or repurchase rate or lending rate. You must know the definition. You must also know how it can be applied to cool down the underperforming economy or to stimulate the what you call it, to stimulate underperforming economy or cool down the overheating economy. I mean on that. So if ever the economy is at peak, it's overheating, it should be cooled down using these instruments. If ever it's underperforming, it should be stimulated to increase the level of economic activities. So we have repo rate or repurchase rate, cash reserve requirement or reserve requirement ratio. Some are calling this one cash reserves. And then also we have open market transaction. Then we have also moral suasion or moral persuasion. These are instruments of the fiscal policy that are important for you to be able to apply them when you deal with the business cycle, and also when you are dealing with maybe the overheat, I mean the what you call the weak exchange rate or the stronger exchange rate. Mention any two spheres of the government. That's obvious. We have the government, local government, provincial, as well as we have the national government. Know their responsibilities. Know what are their special duties in the public sector, so that you can be able to answer the question under public sector when it comes in as a data response, asking you maybe the role of local governance. You must be able to provide the correct answer. And then we continue. Mention any two effects of public sector failure. So should the public sector fail, what happens? There will obviously be social instability, economic instability, and political instability. Now, you have to understand what is meant by the public sector failure. So that is also important. You can't just answer the question without knowing the main content in there. List any two sub-accounts of the balance of payments. So now we are moving. You know the BOP as a systematic book of records. Now, sub-accounts, we have current account, capital transfer account, as well as the financial account. You need to know these sub accounts in details now, so that you can be able to answer the middle order up to higher order question. Mention any two features of fiscal policy. These are characteristics of fiscal policy. It is goal bound. Number two, it is demand based, and also it is cyclical. So you need to be able to explain such if ever it's required in your section B. And then give any two types of the business cycle. We have the goosenets. Remember, in this situation you deal with, as we define, we talk about the number of years the business cycle can take to be a full cycle, as well as the nature of investment. So the goosenet is a part of it which takes about 3 to 5 years. You know the investment part of that is required, which is a part of stock and inventory. Juggler. So that's one business cycle. Also, you have to know number of years. You have to know nature of investment. So it is important that you keep that in mind, so that you can be able to give the difference between these types of the business cycle. Remember, juggler is based on 7 to 11 years, which is what we call it's a machinery and equipment. We have the kitchen, which takes the period of between 15 to 25 years, where we mainly invest in the construction projects. And then we have contractive, the biggest one, that takes the period of 45 to 60 years, where we deal with transport, infrastructure, and construction. We have demand driven, which is pushed by the change in demand. We have supply driven, which is caused by the change in supply or accurate supply. Then we have the political, that is pushed by or caused by what we call changes in the political landscape. Whenever they increase maybe government spending due to the fact that there will be elections, that become the political business cycle, because it improved because of change in political dynamics at the time. Then make the order. That's when we have to link now. So remember, 2.1.2, 3.1.2, and 4.1.2, that's a middle order. Be able to apply the content, understand the question before attempting to answer, relate concept on the question statement, and be mindful of the action verb as you answer. Increase or decrease, then answer in full sentences. And then let's check examples of these questions here. We have, how does increase in taxes affect the economy? You can check the increase, firstly, not decrease. And then in what? In taxes. Affecting what? Affecting the economy. So now we are linking taxes and economy, but whenever taxes are increasing, we know that if ever taxes are increasing, they become a disincentive in the economy. So increase in taxes is detrimental to the economy. It decreases level of spending and result in low production and economic growth. Should taxes be increased, that can lead to people having less disposable income. That can lead to consumers having less real income. So there will be less consumption on goods and services. Should consumers demand less goods, producers will be discouraged from producing because their goods won't be moving fast in the market. Then there will be less production, less employment, less economic growth. There's a lot we can mention here. Increased taxes can increase state revenues, which can be used to finance the national budget to improve economic activities. That's a good side. Should government increase taxes, either direct or indirect taxes, that can increase the government revenue that can be used even to further government's objective by redistributing income and wealth. High corporate tax or company tax or business taxes increases cost of doing the business and discourage investors into the country's economy. Should the government intervene by increasing the business taxes, businesses will be discouraged from investing in the country, meaning there will be disinvestment or they will withdraw, which can lead even to less investments and also less job opportunities in the country. Then we continue. What impact does high savings have on the size of the multiplier? So now we are talking about impact of leakages on the multiplier. Remember, any kind of the leakage, if ever it increases, it will always decrease the size of the multiplier, because remember, leakages refer to the withdrawal of money from the economy. Money is removed from the flow or from the economy. For that reason, leakages will always decrease the size of the multiplier, including savings. So as savings increase, that will decrease the value of the multiplier. High level of savings withdraw money from the circulation, it decreases level of spending and result in low size of the multiplier. Why are assets subtracted from the balance of payments? Remember, now when we go to BOP, we have liabilities and assets. Liabilities are added because in that situation we talk about the inflow of the foreign currency. So we have added that amount of liabilities. Then we call that amount a liability because any future gain of that particular investment will be enjoyed back in the country of origin. And then why are assets subtracted? Assets are negative in there because they represent the outflow of the domestic currency. If we talk about South African investor investing abroad by starting the company, that money will be recorded as a negative asset because it goes out of the country. But any future gain of that particular asset will be enjoyed back in South Africa in the near future. So for that reason, assets must be subtracted in the BOP because they indicate the outflow of the domestic currency. So assets are subtracted from the balance of payments account because they are the outflow of the domestic. In the domestic economy, the currency goes out or the currency flows out of the country. So it must be indeed subtracted. Why is the net gold written separate in the current account? Remember, if we deal with the trade balance or balance of trade, we have merchandise exports, we have net gold export, we have merchandise imports. Merchandise export is positive because remember, exports are injections, so we must always add exports. So it's positive plus the net gold export, which is also the injection because any kind of the export is an injection, and then minus merchandise imports. Imports must always be subtracted because they indicate the outflow of money from the domestic economy. So net gold export is written separate because of its historical importance. Firstly, remember that the gold is a commodity. It is very important in our country because it brings us more revenues. However, in this instance, it is recorded or written separate in the current account because of its historical importance. The country with more monetized gold used to have a strong currency some years ago. So the gold used to determine the value of the country's currency. So the country with more gold used to have the strong currency. The country with less monetized gold used to have a weak currency. For that reason, it is written separate in there. So it is written separate from merchandise export because of its historical importance or historical value. The gold was used to determine the value of the country's currency. Then we continue. How does the overvalued currency impact the balance of trade? Now we are moving now. If ever the currency is overvalued, meaning that means it is stronger than expected, then it's overvalued. It is stronger than expected. So let's check. As our currency become too stronger, let's say maybe our rand should be 12 rand to the single dollar, but it is now, as it's being too strong, it is 5 rand is the single dollar. It is overvalued in that case. What is going to happen? Our exports will become expensive abroad. So as our export become too expensive, remember what is going to happen? There will be less demand for our exported goods abroad. They will find the way to substitute them with other goods produced from other countries because our South African exports are too expensive for them in those foreign countries. For that reason, that can lead to less demand for exported goods and services, and then also it can lead to less inflow of the foreign currency. So in this situation, you need to be mindful. We are talking about the trade balance, not the terms of trade. Remember, if we talk about terms of trade, we talk about another story. If ever the currency is too strong, it benefits terms of trade. But in this situation, the currency is too strong. Our exports become too expensive. For that reason, there will be less demand for our exports abroad, especially if they are relatively elastic. If they are elastic, then they won't be highly demanded. They will be substituted easily. Then there will be less inflow of the foreign currency as a payment for exports in South Africa. An overvalued currency results in trade deficit because it makes exports appear more expensive, which decreases the foreign demand. There will be less demand for our goods abroad. And then how can the appreciated exchange rate affect terms of trade? If ever our currency has appreciated, remember, if we talk about appreciation, we are talking about the increase in the value of a country's currency in relation to another country's currency due to the market forces. So should the currency appreciate, it becomes stronger. So the question is, how does it affect terms of trade? It benefits terms of trade. If our currency appreciates, that will mean our export will be very much competitive abroad, or they will be expensive. So there will be more earnings received by South Africans from those exported goods and services, because our exports will be expensive. So for that reason, our terms of trade will be increasing, but they might be increasing for the short run. If ever our exports are demand elastic, they must be substituted abroad, which can result in the decrease in demand for our exports abroad. The appreciated exchange rate increases the terms of trade in the short run because it makes export expensive, which increase export earnings. Our export earnings will be increasing, which will be increasing our welfare gain as a country, because the money received from exports can be used even to further economic objectives such as employment, economic growth, as well as maybe reducing economic equity, creating job opportunities to achieve full employment. Why is it necessary for the country to analyze the balance of payments? Remember, balance of payment is all about the country comparing its inflow of the foreign currency as well as the outflow of the domestic currency. So if we cannot analyze the balance of payment properly, it will be difficult for the country to see how competitive it is when it's compared to other world countries. It will be difficult for the country to see how competitive are the domestic businesses as they export their goods and services abroad. It will also be difficult for the country to see if it has to intervene for the action plan if ever we are faced by a BOP, disequilibrium or deficit. It helps the country to discover differences between inflows and the outflows of currencies. And then it is helpful to measure the country's international competitiveness. We can see how competitive are we as a country internationally. Analyzing balance of payments enables the country to use necessary measures such as borrowings if deficit prevails. If ever faced by an issue of BOP deficit, the country can borrow money from IMF and then can access SDR, special drawing rights, and be able to fund its exports so that there will be a reduced balance of payments, disequilibrium or deficit. What impact does the increase in demand for the currency has on its value? If ever the currency is highly demanded, if there's an excess demand for our rand will obviously lose its strength or value. So the increase in demand for the currency that exceeds the supply is regarded as excess demand, which leads to the currency depreciating or losing its value. So the currency will lose the value because the demand for the currency will be more than the supply of that particular currency. How can interest rate be used to strengthen undervalued currency? If ever our currency is now undervalued, it is weaker than expected. You'll find that our rand should be maybe 15 rand to the single dollar, but it's now costing about maybe 22 rand is a single dollar. It is undervalued. How can we use interest rate? How can the Reserve Bank use interest rate? Reserve Bank can decrease interest rate, which will decrease the demand for the domestic currency. Foreign indirect investors will be discouraged from investing if lower returns are obtainable. Remember, investors that invest on shares are always attracted by the increase in the interest rate because they know that their shares will be accumulative faster. So should the state or Reserve Bank lower interest rate, they are discouraged from investing on indirect investment like investing on paper assets or financial securities. And then what effect will the decrease in repo rate has on the consumption spending? Remember, the decrease in repo rate. Obviously, if ever repo rate has been lowered, that will mean the credit will become more affordable and cheap in the economy. Households and businesses will be encouraged to borrow more money from financial institutions. Even commercial banks will be encouraged to borrow more money from the South African Reserve Bank, which will be increasing money supply. We know we are always tempted to spend. Should consumers have more money, they are always tempted to spend. They spend money they don't even have. That will be increasing the consumption spending. A decrease in repo rate increases credit creation as loans become more cheap and affordable, which will increase money supply and increase consumption spending or consumption expenditure. How can the increase in infrastructural cost hamper economic growth? Now we are going straight to supply side policies. If ever the cost of infrastructure increases in South Africa, like cost of energy, cost of transport, cost of communication, remember businesses are very much linked to those to that particular infrastructure for them to operate. So if the cost of infrastructure become too cost effective or expensive for businesses, they tend to focus on paying for those costs instead of producing more goods and services. So as the cost of infrastructure increases, that become a disincentive to businesses. They tend to spend more money on the cost of doing the business instead of producing goods and services. High cost of infrastructure such as transport, energy, and communication uh, normally do what? Increase the cost of doing the business. This decrease production, aggregate supply, GDP, and economic growth. So there will be decrease in economic growth because as the cost of doing the business are increasing, businesses find themselves having less to produce due to the fact that they have to cover for the cost of the infrastructure. It is important that you are able to link. How can South African Reserve Bank use repurchase rate to stimulate underperforming economy? If the economy is faced by economic slump, or let's say economy is at recession or depression or down the edge trap, how can a repo rate be used? Obviously, the government can intervene by implementing expansion policy by lowering repo rate so that it can encourage the creation of credit and money supply in the economy. South African Reserve Bank can decrease repurchase rate to make credit more affordable in financial institutions, which increase money supply and increase the spending for goods and services. Data response questions. So this part of the section consists of cartoons, extract, data, tables, graphs, and images. This is what you should be able to analyze. So it's important. You must be able to interpret information on any data response given to you. And then do not copy extract when unnecessary. Only 1 mark answers can be found from the given data. It is important. I did mention this one that in section B, data response, not all answers can be found from the extract. Basically, 1 or 2 answers for 1 mark can be found in there. Otherwise, everything is your knowledge. For instance, let's say we are talking about question 3, 3.2.3, definition or description. 3.2.4, you apply your knowledge now to the given data or to the given problem. You must be able to link again 2.3.5. You do the same or you even calculate. So it is important that you improve yourself. Note that 2.2.3 up to 4.3.3 requires your content knowledge. And then questions 2.2.4, 2.2.5 up to 4.3.5 need your link. You must be able to apply the content, or also you must be able to calculate in there when you have to calculate in 4.3.5, 3.3.5, etc. Here is the data we are dealing with, the content that we have covered. Here you see there is a circular flow. Here we are given the goods and services, which is a part of the real flow, goods and services. And then we are given factors of production, that's a real flow. Revenue, that's a money flow. And then also we have revenue, real flow, expenditure, revenue, money flow, and then expenditure, money flow. Factors of production. Then which participants are here? We have how businesses and the household. Then do we have any foreign sector? No. Do we have government? No. In this situation, we have a closed economy. 2 markets are provided, product market as well as the factor market. Then you can check the questions that are coming in. What is depicted by the diagram above? Circular flow model, 2-sector, circular flow model, or can be a closed economy circular flow. Identify one example of the real flow, factors of production or goods and services. Then your 1 mark has been exhausted. The information that is found in the extract has been exhausted. Now you need to deal with yourself and your knowledge. Let's see. Briefly describe the term product market. Now, it is not provided in there. There's no definition there. You need to know it. Then product market, the market where final consumer goods and services are traded, or goods and services are traded or sold or bought. Remember, we can't simply deal with the consumer goods because in the product market, we also come across the capital goods. So we continue. And then what could the Minister of Finance do to promote economic activities in South Africa? We want to promote economic activities. There is the Minister of Finance. What can the Minister of Finance do? What is the duty of Minister of Finance? Is to deal with what? Deal with the fiscal policy. Now, what are the instruments of fiscal policy? Taxation and government spending. Now you can answer the question because you now understand those duties of the Minister of Finance and the instrument required or relevant for the Minister of Finance. Creating more confidence in macroeconomic policies between the role players in the economy, developing an investor-friendly legislation, availing opportunities for all with capabilities to participate in the economy, e.g., small, micro, and medium enterprises, overseeing an SA economy operating in the global economy rather than closed economy, making laws and legislation that permit participation, conducting research on what needs to be done and promote. Done and promote. So these are some possible answers. There are many answers you can provide in a way that Minister of Finance maybe can also intervene by enforcing the increase in government spending through job creation. That alone is an answer. Also, can also intervene with the cabinet by ensuring that they lower taxes to encourage people to spend more in the economy. So also lower maybe company tax so that business can be attracted to invest more in South African economy, which can increase job opportunities. How can foreign direct investment (FDIs) influence national income? So now we move further. Foreign direct investment. Remember, those are businesses that belong in foreign countries, but they've decided to invest in South Africa. Especially, we talk about the business that will be having huge impact on the multiplier and multiplier effect. So how can they influence national income? Remember, as these businesses invest in South Africa, they bring cash injection. Money flows into the country. Automatically, our income will be increasing as they flow into the country. So an increase in foreign direct investment (FDIs) will influence national income in a positive way, but we don't give a mark for positive. Then investing more and injection into the circular flow, which will increase production of goods and services, increasing employment opportunities that will result in greater demand for goods and services, increasing aggregate demand or multiplier effect. Remember, should people be employed by those businesses, that will mean now there will be more money available, so people will be demanding more goods and services. And as money is injected, that can result to a knock-off effect of the multiplier effect. We are giving data response again on national accounts. Remember, if we talk about national accounts, we refer to the methods of calculating GDP according to the SNA, the System of National Accounts, which is used to ensure that there is a standardization on the calculation of national accounts across the world. And then also, which is used to ensure that there is better comparability or comparison between countries' national accounts as they function. Also, to ensure that it monitors the flow of money, goods, and services between all active participants in the economy. Here we are given the production method. You can see primary sector, secondary, and tertiary sector. And then in this part, we are given the current prices. What is meant by the current price? Remember, those are GDP figures that have not been adjusted for inflation. They've been inflated. And then we are given also the constant prices here, which indicates GDP figures that have been adjusted for inflation, meaning inflation effect in this situation has been removed to ensure that we discover the actual trends of the economic activities. So here comes into my mind, why does the government prefer GDP at constant prices over nominal prices or current prices? It is because GDP at constant prices does not give us distorted figures. It's been, inflation has been removed. Should we use it to calculate economic growth? We discover the actual growth of the economic activities, not the inflation. Then we are given 2014, 2015, 2016. But then be aware, 2015 is our base year. Let's check which sector contributed the most. Obviously, tertiary sector contributed the most across. Why does it contribute the most in the economy? Because tertiary sector provides or distributes goods that are value added. They've been transformed to final goods. They are no longer the raw material or at the natural stage. That's why tertiary sector contribute the most. Why does the primary sector contribute less in the economy? It is because it sells goods that have not been transformed into final goods. They have not yet been value added. So you can check. Tertiary sector is the main contributor even under what we call GDP at constant prices. Here is the question again. Why is the GDP why are current prices always higher than constant prices? It is because current prices have not been adjusted for inflation. They are highly inflated. They have inflation effect, while constant prices have been adjusted. Inflation effect has been removed on the constant prices. Let's look at the question. Which method was used in there? Were production method or value added or GDP bracket P method? And then which year is currently used as a base year in South Africa? That is 2015. We currently use 2015 as a base year. Briefly describe the term gross national product. So that's the value of all final goods and services produced by citizens of the country over a particular period. Normally, we say permanent residents of the country. We can even say regardless of where they are in the world. And then we continue. What impact does natural disasters have on agricultural harvest? If ever there are natural disasters, how does that affect the harvest under agriculture? We're talking about the primary sector there. Natural disasters negatively affect agricultural harvest since they hamper the crop production and negatively impact on cultivation process, which will lead to less harvest within the agricultural sector. Calculate the percentage contributed by the tertiary sector into the gross value added at basic prices in 2016. Show all calculations. Okay, so we are looking for contribution in as a percentage by tertiary sector. So we say tertiary sector 2016 divided by gross value added at basic price 2016 multiplied by 100. That's when we say 2,654,870 divided by 3,816,456 multiplied by 100. Then what we get? 68.6% or 69%. That tells you that tertiary sector contribute the most in South African economy compared to the primary sector and the secondary sector. Here we go. We are given the multiplier and the whole information is provided in here. It's unlike when we are given Y and Y1 here. So in this situation, we are given firstly what we call original consumption function, which says E equal to 10 plus 0.5Y. You can see our injection is 10 million. And then the new consumption function there, E1 equal to 30 plus 0.5Y. Then that means our new investment is 30 million. So after that, you can also check that E equals to Y indicates that income along this 45-degree line indicate that, income and expenditure, they are both equal. There will be equilibrium along here. There will be E and E1 along here. And then our investment line is increasing, showing that there's a further injection in the economy. And then we are given the MPC, which is equal to 0.5. There is our 0.5. Remember, this consumption function says to you, on the given expenditure, of which is equal to 10 million, we spend half of the given expenditure, meaning we consume half, which then means 0.5 is our MPC, marginal propensity to consume. Now we'll be looking at the questions and see what will unfold. Obviously, in this situation, we are given the number and this number. You will be able to calculate either using MPC or an MPS, or using the change in what we call in the level of income and the what we call and the expenditure or injection. So let's go further and see what we have in there. Identify original consumption function in there. The first question, which is obviously 10, is 0 equal to 10 plus 0.5. Y give the marginal propensity to consume, which is 0.5. Briefly describe the term induced consumption. Remember, if you know induced consumption, you must also know autonomous consumption. Induced consumption refers to the consumption that is dependent on income, meaning the spending that cannot happen if income is zero. So what about autonomous spending? Autonomous consumption or spending refer to the spending that cannot, can occur even if income is zero. So it is independent of income. How does the increase in marginal rate to tax influence the value of the multiplier? Remember, if ever taxation increases, that decreases the size of the multiplier, because remember, tax is a leakage. All leakages will have a bad impact on the multiplier if ever they are increasing. Using the formula change in income over change in injection, calculate the value of the multiplier for the above diagram. Show all calculations. 4 marks. Let's check. These are your answers. Identification, we say E0 equal to 10 plus 0.5Y. Give the marginal propensity to consume, which is MPC, is 0.5. We discovered there on your consumption function. And then briefly describe the term induced consumption. So this is consumption, induced consumption refers to the consumption that depends on income or that cannot happen if the level of income is zero. Then how does the increase in marginal rate to tax MRT influence the value of the multiplier? So it will decrease the value of the multiplier due to decrease in the marginal propensity to consume. Remember, if ever there is more MRT, marginal rate to tax, that means the MPC will be reduced, because the money that is taxed can also be used for consumption. Then we check the calculation. So using the formula using the formula change in income over change in injection, calculate the value of the multiplier. Let's check. So this is the change we are looking for. So we'll say 60 minus 20, and then we'll also say 30 minus 10. So 60 minus 20 divided by 30 minus 10. Remember, this 60 minus 20 is this one here. And then 30 minus 10, you must not confuse the system. In this, on your vertical axis, on the expenditure, you focus on this amount on your investment line. You focus on these two so that you take the new one, subtract the old one, you get your answer. So that gives us K equal to 40 divided by 20, which gives us 2. Even if we use MPC and MPS, we would be saying K equals to 1 over 1 minus MPC. Then we substitute 1 over 1 minus 0,5 because this is our MPC 0,5. 1 over 0,5, K equals to 2. We still get 2 in both ways. So it is important that you understand how we use the change in what you call in income and injection. Remember, in term 1, you were given the same graph, but you were given here y and y1. You were not required to calculate the multiplier, but you were required to calculate what you call the change in aggregate national income, which was then had to be calculated using available value of MPC as well as the injection. So it is important that you keep that in your mind. Also, you must be able to calculate the multiplier effect. For instance, let's say we are required to calculate the multiplier effect. Here, we have K equals to 2. So we say multiplier effect equal to K times J. So we will take the first investment line, which is 10. We say 2 times 10 equals to 20. There is the 20 that we are having. Then if we want to calculate this 60, we say K times J. We'll say then 2 as the multiplier value multiplied by 30 equals to 60. There is the 60 that we are having. So it is important that we are able to do everything on this multiplier graph. Also, be able to draw the graph. Be able to draw the graph and interpret. Also, be able to draw the graph in case the examiner requires you to show the disinvestment. We are always drawing graphs increasingly, showing the increase in the injection or in investment or expenditure. Now, one can ask you the question to draw the graph showing the disinvestment, the withdrawal of money from the economy. Obviously, the line will be going down now, indicating that there's a withdrawal of money from the economy. Income will be decreasing. Expenditure will also be decreasing. You must always be able to answer questions in all angles as they come into your examination. We are given the Phillips curve here. Then we have our Phillips curve here on vertical inflation, horizontal unemployment rate. And then we can see that 40% is our natural unemployment originally. And then this one is new at point F. And then we can see that if ever unemployment decreased from 40 to 30, we have point C, which increase our inflation from 0 to 3. And then if ever, unemployment decreased further to 20%, that is point B. Inflation increased further to 6%, is still within the target range. And then if ever then unemployment decreased further to 10%, inflation increased to 9%, which is out of the inflation target range now. That is indicated by point A. We can see that there's a shift of the Phillips curve from PC to PC1. What is the cause of this? This is caused by the improvement of the supply side policies, such as education and training, skill development. Those are parts that can improve that can shift the supply side policy. We call that human resource development. Then be aware that as unemployment decreases, inflation will be increasing. Meaning, if unemployment decreases, employment increase, there will be more money available in the economy, which will be encouraging people to spend more. As people demand more than what can be supplied, that will be causing inflation on your vertical axis. That means we have an inverse or negative relationship between inflation and the unemployment, because as unemployment decreases, what happened to the inflation? Inflation increases. There's an inverse relationship, or it's not in proportion. These are the questions. Identify any one point in the graph that shows the natural rate of unemployment. Name the business cycle turning point turning point which inflation is at the highest. Briefly describe the term business cycling. Explain the reason for the curve, for the curve to move to PC1. Why is the relationship between inflation and unemployment regarded as inverse? Use the information. So in this situation here, you need to use information on the graph. You must not just give a reason openly. You must also link it to the graph to say, as unemployment decreased from this amount to this value, that means inflation is increasing from this point to this point. Then let's check, identify one point, that is D and F. Those are the points that indicate natural unemployment. Name the business cycle turning point during which inflation is at the highest. That is peak. That's when inflation is too high. Briefly describe the term business cycle. Business cycle is the decrease and decrease of economic activities, or upswing and downswing of economic activities. or ups and downs of the economy, expansion and contraction of economy, or fluctuations of economic activities. We continue. Explain the reason for the curve to move to PC1. So we can see that the curve has moved. I've already answered the question. Implementation of the supply side policies, improving labor skills and productivity through better education and training, improving human resource development. This is human resource development being improved, will always shift the supply side policy from the left to the, from the right to the left. Why is the relationship between inflation and unemployment regarded as inverse using the information on the graph? So when the rate of unemployment decrease, the rate of inflation increase. When unemployment increase, inflation decrease. So on PC curve or Phillips curve, when the unemployment is low at 10%, the rate of the inflation is at 9% at the highest. And then when the rate of the unemployment increases to 20%, the inflation rate decreases to 6%. So that's how you explain if they say using the graph. It is not just the open question. It's open but focusing on the graph. Data response, again, we are given what we call terms of trade. So here we are given 2020, 21, and 22, and then index of import prices. So we have an increasing trend or upward trend because it's 123, 134,2, 160. Index of export prices 146,9, 168,7, 176,6. It's adapted from South African Reserve Bank. And then terms of trade for 2020, 119,4. 2021, we have to calculate for 4 marks. 2022, 109. You can see that they are decreasing here. It was 119, it's 109. So identify the institution that prepares the terms of trade in South Africa. Give the reason for the increase in import prices during July 2022. Briefly describe the concept balance of payments. Briefly explain the effect of deterioration of terms of trade to the country's welfare, and then calculate terms of trade. Let's check then again. These are questions. Identify the institution is South African Reserve Bank. It was given there at the bottom of your data response. Give one reason for the increase in import price during July 2022. A weaker domestic currency might have been a reason. Increase in global prices, increase in demand of imported capital goods, increase in import tariffs. Briefly describe the term balance of payment. Balance of payment refers to the systematic record of all transactions between countries. Whenever we're trading with countries, the whole info is recorded under the balance of payment, which considers inflow of the foreign currency as well as the outflow of the domestic currency. Briefly explain the effect of the deterioration in terms of trade has on the country's welfare. If ever terms of trade are decreasing, how does that affect the country's welfare? Let me give you a brief. As our terms of trade are decreasing, there will be less money flowing into the country as payment for exports, meaning there will be less export earnings. Should we have less export earnings as a country, there will be less inflow of money or cash injection that can be used to further economic objectives in the country. That will mean less money will be available to create job opportunities. Less money will be available to improve infrastructure development for the country. For that reason, then we will be having an issue with the decrease in terms of trade. It can lead to what? Welfare loss for the country. Let's see. It will lead to the decline in living standard as foreign currency earnings are relatively less. We receive less income, meaning national income will be decreasing, meaning less injections into the country. Imported consumer goods will be expensive. So if we import some goods from other countries, they will become relatively expensive. A decrease in terms of trade shows that the country is poor. More capital is flowing out of the country to pay for imported goods and services. Then we calculate the terms of trade for July 2021A, show all calculations. Then we check terms of trade. TOT stand for terms of trade. Remember, index of export prices divided by index of import prices multiplied by 100. Should you turn around the formula, everything will be wrong. You must ensure that your export prices are the numerator and then your import price are the denominator, then you multiply by 100. Then it's 168,7 divided by 134,2 multiplied by 100. That gives us what? 125,7 or 126 if we round off. Those are your terms of trade. And then we are given the balance of payments. Start the table below and other questions that follow. So we are given the balance of payments on the current account. Remember, let me brief you on something. If we talk about the current account, it differs into two. We have firstly physical imports and exports or tangible imports and exports. That's why we talk about merchandise exports, net gold export, and merchandise imports. These are tangible. These are physical imports and exports. These are the ones that will be giving us the trade balance or the balance of trade. Then we go further to the invisible imports and exports, where we talk about services receipts, income receipts, payment for services, income payment, as well as the current transfer. These are the part of what? Of invisible imports and exports. We cannot touch them, we cannot see them, but they are the part of the balance of payment current account. So let's check. Merchandise exports contributed about 1,175,547, and then merchandise imports contributed about 1,222,944. That simply means merchandise imports are more than merchandise exports. Then in that situation, there is a more outflow of money than the inflow of money into the country's economy. You can see on the current account, we are faced by the current account deficit because it is negative 172,962. Remember, if it's negative as a deficit, that means there is more outflow of the domestic currency and less inflow of the foreign currencies. Then it will be negative. But should there be a surplus, that simply tells you that there is more inflow of foreign currencies into the country and less outflow of domestic currencies. That means then we have a surplus. Which institution provides such information is South African Reserve Bank. Let's look at the questions. Mention the balance of payment item that consists of physical goods. That's a trade balance. There are physical goods or tangible imports and exports in there. Name any one example of services receipts. We talk about the transportation of goods and services and passengers between countries. We talk about travel services. We talk about construction services. We talk about financial and insurance services. We talk about business, professional, and technical services. We talk about government. There are many services you can mention under services that can be receipts or payment for services. And then the money spent on foreign tourists in South Africa. These are services receipts in this situation. And then briefly describe the term current account. Remember, current account referred to the BOP sub-account that capture transaction based on income, expenditure, production, payments, and transfers. Let's check. Current account is a balance of payment sub-account that capture transaction based on income and expenditure, production, services, and transfers. And then how can the depreciation of the local currency correct the balance of payment deficit? If ever our currency depreciates, meaning it loses its value, how can it correct our BOP deficit? Remember, if our currency depreciates, that means our exports become more cheap abroad. As they become cheap abroad, there will be more demand for our exported goods in the foreign countries. As there is more demand, that will mean more goods going out over goods coming in. Remember, as our currency depreciates, their currency appreciates. Imports become expensive, exports become cheap. For that reason, there will be more demand for our goods, which might be decreasing the BOP deficit. Let's check our current account deficit. Depreciated local currency makes export cheap and imports expensive. This increased the foreign demand on South African exports and decreased the demand for imported goods and services. Calculate the trade balance A for March 2019. Show all calculations. So we have merchandise exports plus net gold export. Remember, they are both positive minus merchandise imports. Why are we subtracting imports? Because imports are the leakage. Money is flowing out of the country. Then it's 1,175,547 plus 71,678 minus 1,222,944. Let's look at the answer. Is positive. Trade balance is 24,281, meaning our exports exceeded imports. The inflow of the foreign currencies exceeded the outflow of the domestic currency. And then business cycle comes in. Okay, let's check. Let me go back slightly and interpret. There is the business cycle. We are given all phases that are there. We have positive output. There is an increase, recession, the decrease, a trough, turning point, negative output. Down there, there's a decrease, recovery, there's a growth, peak, there's a boom. And then we have our what we call actual output as a real GDP. We have long-term trend in there. Then contraction and expansion are all around this business cycle. Then let's look at the questions in there. Identify the point that indicates economic slump. That's a trough. And then how is the amplitude of the business cycle measured? The amplitude of the business cycle is measured through expansion and contraction, or upswing and downswing. Then briefly describe the term recession. Recession is a consecutive decline in economic activities which can last for 6 months or 2 consecutive quarters. That is a recession. And then we continue. How can fiscal policy be used to dampen an overheated economy? If the economy is overheating, that means it's at peak of prosperity. It is doing too much. Why I'm saying it's overheating? It's overheating because in there there's more money chasing few goods. In there there's high level of importation tendency because people are having more money. In there also we can come across BOP deficit because of what? Because people are holding on more money to satisfy their needs and wants. They can demand imports easily. Also, there's high level of inflation because more money is chasing few goods, meaning the demand is increasing more than the supply at peak of prosperity. That's why we say the economy is overheating. So contractional fiscal policy can be applied where the government spending is reduced and taxes are increased. Remember, when we reduce government spending, there will be less money flow in the economy and less job creation, less demand for goods and services. When we increase taxes, there will be less real income, there will also less disposable income, then people will demand less goods and services. What negative impact does the continuous increase in repo rate has in South African economy? If ever repo rate keep on increasing, remember it is discourages to people from creating more credit or borrowing more money from commercial banks, which will hamper their spending. The level of aggregate demand or spending will be decreasing because people will be spending most of their money paying their debts, not buying goods and services. Continuous increase in repo rate, increase cost of borrowings, and decrease the money supply. It results in high loans repayments, which leave people indebted and with less income to demand goods and services. The increase in repo rate increase financial capital repayment by businesses, which increase the cost of doing the business and also can cause what you call the cost push inflation. Should business borrow capital from commercial banks, then repo rate increases. They will then be paying more money as they pay back their loan repayments or capital repayments. For that reason, it becomes too expensive for them to produce using those machines that they bought through those loans. For that reason, there can be what you call a cost push inflation in our economy. Then we are giving data response on the foreign exchange market. So we have here the rand depreciating from 15 rand 20 to 15 rand 50. Remember, when we deal with the foreign exchange markets, we use indirect approach. What is meant by indirect approach? We mean if ever the rand is moving from 15 rand to 14 rand, 15 rand to 17 rand is to $1, that's a depreciation. But if it's moved from 17 rand to 10 rand, that's an appreciation because that means we can afford more of the foreign currency. And then we can see that demand is increasing from D to D1, moving from left to the right. And then in that situation, that means our currency is losing its value or is depreciating. Then supply remains constant. Then our rand depreciates here from 15 rand 20 to 15 rand 50. Then let's check data response. Name one exchange rate system. We have free managed exchange rate system and then a free floating exchange rate system. Remember, it's a managed floating. This is very important. Managed floating exchange rate, not just managed exchange rate, managed floating or managed or controlled floating exchange rate, free floating exchange rate, as well as the fixed exchange rate system. Give the type of currency used in South Africa. That's obviously a rand. Then briefly describe the term foreign exchange. So foreign exchange is the conversion of one country's currency into another currency. We continue. Explain the value of the rand against the dollar after the shift of the demand curve in the graph. So the rand has decreased in the value against the dollar, meaning it has depreciated. The rand has depreciated against the US dollar. How can the appreciation of the currency be negative in the country if ever the currency appreciates? The currency appreciation may increase export expenses, meaning exports will be too expensive. In that situation, there might be less demand. And then when the country's currency appreciates, the number of commodities exported from the country will decrease because if ever the demand elastic, they will be replaced abroad by other goods from other countries. This situation can drastically cause what we call the country's GDP decrease. And then we check, we have discussion questions for 8 marks. That's when now we deal with either middle order or higher order questions. Let's be quick because time is not on our side. With the aid of a well-labeled graph or Laffer curve, explain the impact of tax rate increases on the state revenues. So this is the Laffer curve. It is being upward sloping. Remember, on the vertical axis, we have tax revenues. On the horizontal, we have tax rate. Then our Laffer curve is upward sloping as much as people are still motivated to pay tax. We can see if tax rate is 0, there's nothing. Tax rate is T2. It starts to increase to this point. Tax rate is T. it goes to the apex, the highest point. But should tax rate be aggressively to the point of which it goes to maybe 60%, taxpayers will start to be involved in illegal practice like tax evasion by not disclosing their sources of income at this point. Then tax revenues will be decreasing from the first amount to the R1. And then if ever tax rate is 100%, tax revenue will be zero because no one will be willing to work. So effect of tax increase in tax revenue, as the tax rate increases, tax revenue will be increasing slightly. We saw that when there is when the curve peaks at the apex, the tax rate at T, the tax to the government will be maximized, and then at tax rate higher than T, state revenues will start to decline because workers will refuse to work or disclose their sources of income, which can be tax evasion. But if it's a legal practice, we call that a tax avoidance, which is normally done by businesses. And then we continue with the middle order. Briefly discuss moving averages for 8 marks. A moving average is a tool used to analyze changes that occur in series of data over a period of time. It is calculated to iron out minor fluctuations of the business cycle. The data given can be used to calculate moving averages for the business cycle for past 3 years, or even it can be 3 years, can be 5 years, etc. So you must be flexible to the question. Moving average is an analytical tool used to forecast the trend of economic performance over a period of time. And then it is the statistical data or tool or data series used by economists, businesses, and government authorities to predict the future economic performance. And then we continue with the same question by using moving averages. By using moving average determined from the given data, economists can get a clear picture or the glimpse of the general trend of economic activities or the business cycle. To calculate moving averages, qualitative and quantitative methods are used. Remember, we have those also. Then quantitative method is based on mathematics, while qualitative method is yields, research, assumptions, and probabilities. Qualitative method is also known as judgmental method. And then we continue with the middle order question. Still the same question. Qualitative method is appropriate to use when previous data is not available, because that's where you use assumptions. By calculating the moving average, economists and businesses will be able to analyze economic trends over a period of time. And then informed predictions are made when data series has been used properly to analyze or to calculate moving averages. How can changes in terms of trade influence South African economy? Remember, changes, we mean increase or decrease. An improvement in terms of trade comes as a result of increased export prices or the decrease in import prices. An increase in export prices would increase economic welfare in the short term, as more revenue is earned with the same or less expenditure on imports. A decrease in import prices will result in less expenditure or less import payments. Payment for imports in the short term. High export earnings and lower import payments may reduce balance of payments deficit in the short term. Less resources will be used to produce exports to pay for imports. And then demand for South African export may decrease in the long run due to high prices in case our exports are demand elastic. A decrease in terms of trade comes as a result of the decrease in export prices and increase in import prices. A decrease in export prices would decrease economic welfare in the short term, as less revenues is earned with the same or less expenditure on imports. An increase in import prices would result in more expenditure or more payments on imports in the short term. Lower export earnings and higher import payments may increase the balance of payments deficit in the short term. More resources will be used to produce exports to pay for imports. The demand for South African exports may increase in the long run. We continue. How can the Department of Finance use fiscal policy to stimulate the underperforming economy? Then in this situation, they can implement expansionary fiscal policy by increasing government spending. So the state can intervene by increasing its spending on different economic variables, by increasing maybe infrastructure development, job creation, social transfers, etc., or subsidies given to businesses, etc. That can lead to the increase in economic activities. Then the government can increase the spending on infrastructure, investments, social transfers, services, as well as increasing spending on wages and salaries for public servants. That can lead to more money available to spend on goods and services. The increase in government spending stimulates aggregate demand, production, real GDP, as well as economic growth. Continuously, The state can lower taxation in both direct and indirect taxes. So lower taxes are great incentive into the economy. The decrease in indirect taxes decrease selling prices and increase the real income. Also, there will be more demand for goods and services. Decreasing direct taxes will always increase what we call disposable income for the household and increase spending because people are always tempted to spend. Decreasing corporate taxes create an opportunity for business to expand their operations through investment, which it creates more job opportunities, and the level of spending in the economy will also be increasing because of lowered what we call business tax or company tax or corporate tax. Why is it important to calculate real GDP? Remember, real GDP refers to GDP figures that have been adjusted for inflation. That's what we call GDP at constant prices. GDP is important because it gives information about the size of the economy and how economy is performing. Then the growth rate of the real GDP is often used as an indicator to generate health of the economy. If ever there's an increase in real GDP, we can also consider having growth in economy. Then in broad terms, an increase in real GDP is interpreted as a sign of the economy doing well. Then real GDP makes comparing GDP from year to year and from different years more meaningful because it shows comparisons of both the quantity of and the value of goods and services. Real GDP measures economy's total goods and services in a given year, taking into account changes in the price level or inflation. Then done with the section B, we are going to the section C now. Let's see what we have. These are the essays. So paper 1 essays for tomorrow, you can expect the following: macroeconomics essays, discussing detailed markets within the 4-sector model, circular flow. So in this situation, you can be able to get your marks because this essay is very easy. And then discussing detailed new economic paradigm, explain smoothing business cycle. Here you must deal with the demand side and supply side policies. Remember, in the introduction, you define what we call either economic paradigm or you define the business cycle. Remember, business cycle has been defined before. Economic paradigm refers to the new economic perspective that function to eliminate uncertainties on the use of fiscal policy and monetary policy when smoothing the business cycle, or is refers to the perspective that is embedded on demand side policies and the supply side policies. And then you go in to talk about demand side policies. There you define demand side policies refer to the policies that are used to influence aggregate demand. As you get in there, you talk about, let's say, fiscal policy, government spending, and what we call and taxation. How do we implement government spending during peak and trough? Whenever the economy is overheating at peak, the government can intervene by lowering its spending to decrease the demand for goods and services. But as the economy is down at trough or recession or depression, the state can intervene by increasing government spending so that there will be more job creation, more money flow, and more demand for goods and services. How can we implement taxes? At peak, economy is overheating. The state can intervene by decreasing taxes so that it can reduce the effect of the inflation. That can lead to less demand for goods and services. But at trough, the state can intervene by decreasing taxes so that there will be more disposable income available and more real income. That can lead to people demanding more goods and services. You go to the monetary policy, you define the monetary policy, you give us repo rate, which is the interest rate charged by Reserve Bank to commercial banks on their borrowings. So the state can intervene, a Reserve Bank can intervene by increasing repo rate at peak, but decreasing repo rate at trough. So that will always affect the level of money supply in the economy. If ever we increase repo rate at peak, we decrease money supply and borrowings, which will lead to less demand for goods and services. But at trough, we decrease repo rate, which will do what? At trough, we decrease repo rate to increase money supply, but at peak, we increase repo rate. And then cash reserve requirement. That's when the state intervened by increasing cash reserves at peak, so to increase the vol cash so that there will be less money supply and less demand for goods and services. But at trough, what do we do? The Reserve Bank can intervene by decreasing cash reserves so that there will be less vault cash and more money supply to demand goods and services. Open market transaction, remember, that is concerned with the purchase or the sales of bonds in the open market. So in this case, the Reserve Bank can intervene. At peak, the Reserve Bank can intervene by selling bonds or shares into the open market so that there will be less money supply. But going down to trough, central bank can intervene by doing what? By buying bonds from commercial banks or buying shares from commercial banks or financial securities or paper assets, so that there will be more money supply for credit creation in the economy. What about moral persuasion? The Reserve Bank can intervene by instructing commercial banks to be very strict when creating credit if economy is at peak. But if it's at trough, It can allow commercial banks to be lenient when creating credit so that there will be more demand for goods and services. Then we talk about inflation and what we call inflation and unemployment, telling us that as the economic growth increases, it increases what we call the demand, the level of income as well as the demand for goods and services. If ever the demand for goods and services increases, that can simply do what? It can result in what we call increase in prices. And if ever the demand increases more than the supply, that can be regarded as inflation. To tell us if ever economic growth is also increasing, there will be reduced unemployment and increase in employment. And then as unemployment decreases, employment increasing, there will be more money flowing in the economy and there will be more demand for goods and services, which might also result to inflation. And that relationship is illustrated through the Phillips curve. Then you jump to the next one, supply side. These are the policies that are used by the government to influence aggregate supply in the economy. We talk about the cost of doing the business. If they can be reduced, that can be a greater incentive in the economy. For instance, reducing cost of infrastructure, reducing cost of under infrastructure, communication, transport, and energy become a greater incentive to business because they tend to spend less on infrastructure and produce more goods and services. And then reducing administrative cost is also good because it results to less red tape. It results to businesses focusing on producing goods over having to pay for cost of inspection and also of IT returns. Then we talk about also improving efficiency of inputs. In there, we focus on capital consumption. As much as capital is a wear and tear, as we produce goods using machinery, they lose the value. So they must be replaced when they get to be older so that we can remain being efficient. The government must intervene by supporting businesses through depreciation allowances so that they can be able to recover their machines and buy the updated machines with the new technology. Then example can be in South Africa, computer equipment commercially is replaced in the period of 3 years, but commercial vehicles are replaced in the period of 5 years. So to ensure that we keep up with high level of efficiency. Taxation. We know that high taxes are a disincentive in the economy. Should they be reduced, all of them, that can lead to business operating very well and increase the supply of goods and services. Human resource development. Should the state intervene by supporting skill development, education and training, ensuring that it emphasizes on healthcare provision, that can lead to efficiency in the economy because healthy labor force is productive and educated labor force or skilled labor force also is efficient. Then we talk about where the likes of what do we call this one? I'm forgetting this one. For export promotion also is a part of it. Free advisory schemes. That's when the state intervened by providing the support to business that are willing to relocate from urban areas to rural areas where there's a high level of unemployment and poverty. We go to efficiency of markets. We know that the market with too much government intervention normally discourage investors from investing in the country. So we must deregulate deregulation, which is known as removal or withdrawal of unnecessary laws and regulations within the economy. So if ever the government does not intervene that much in the economy, business tend to be attracted to invest in that particular country's economy. They don't want to be much controlled. We talk about the competition. The increase in competition in the economy results to even more job creation, more production, and more supply for goods and services. What is it that the government is doing? It initiated or formed the Competition Policy Act of South Africa to ensure that there's a healthy and fair competition between businesses to avoid power abuse by monopolies, to avoid collusive behavior by oligopolies, allowing even smaller business to function and participate in the economy. We talk about leveling the playing field, ensuring that private sector business are not competing with the public sector because SOEs are receiving financial support from the state on the main budget. Then privatization must also be encouraged. At the same time, we need to combat or fight corruption. That was your essay. Discussing detailed features underpinning forecasting. This one, you did this one in term one, term test. So I believe you still remember the LLC melter. We call this one LLC melter. What do we mean by that? Leading indicators, lagging coincidence, composite, moving average, extrapolation, land, the trend line, and amplitude. So this one is not bad. I think you will always remember. Discussing detailed public sector objectives. In this situation, you'll always remember full employment, economic growth, price stability, economic equity, as well as exchange rate stability. Economic growth refers to the increase in economic activities of the country measured through real GDP. And then also we talk about full employment, which occurs when all economically active population that have been looking for jobs are employed. We know that the government focuses on ensuring that it supports informal sector businesses so that there will be more job creation. And then price stability, that's when prices are not increasing or decreasing over time. Because we know if ever prices are faced by instability, that will create uncertainties in the economy for both consumers and investors. Exchange rate stability, that's when exchange rate does not appreciate or depreciate over time. It is important to achieve that exchange rate stability so that there will be a good environment for investors in the country. So the state intervenes by using monetary and fiscal policy to ensure the exchange rate stability within the country. Economic equity, that's when in the country we don't face high level of inequalities. There is no much huge income gaps within the country. So the state can intervene through some redistribution process to avoid or to reduce economic inequalities. And then we continue. Discuss in detail reasons for public sector linking them to poor public sector provisioning. In this case, we say manage public services before liability. So it is important that you know in this one we deal with the management failure, where the management is poor and weak. The management is lacking experience that is required for them to get the job done. They are ignorant over their duties and they are corrupt. They use public funds to benefit themselves. They are not even skilled enough because they are employed through nepotism. So they do everything wrong because they know that they will never be held accountable. And then also we talk about politicians. We know that politicians are a problem in our economy. So at times they increase government spending because they want to be voted for. So as they do so, that amount of money is not accounted for. So they only appear to spend if ever they want to be elected in the economy. After election, they disappear, which means they have a short-term horizon. They don't have a long-term plan. And then also we talk about the special interest groups. That's when you refer to powerful groups in the economy that are very much influential to the government decision making. We refer to Chamber of Commerce, Association of Farmers, Taxi Council. Those groups are very much powerful in the economy. They can easily influence government spending, so to favor themselves. In that case, that can lead to Pareto inefficiency because instead of money flowing to the particular group, it go to the another group because that group is favored by the government and also is feared because it's very much powerful. Those are special interest groups. We talk about the structural weaknesses. In that case, we refer to officials where in the office they make conflicting decisions. One is saying one decision, one is saying another. So these decisions are working against each other, which will really delay the provision of public goods and services and result to public sector failure or inefficiency. Then we talk about apathy. That's when we refer to public officials faced by the issue of don't care notion. They don't care. They do things carelessly. They're ignorant because they know they will never be held accountable. That increases high level of public sector inefficiency as it delays the provision of public goods and services. So when public officials are becoming apathetic, they know that they will never be held accountable because under public sector, accountability is difficult because public sector is complex. It takes a longer period of time for one to be held accountable. And then we talk about bureaucracy. That's when public officials obey rules and regulations beyond control. They focus on obeying rules that favor themselves instead of rules that are favoring the society. They don't do this thing that we call a batupile. They focus on themselves. They sieve the rules and regulations. For instance, you come across the what do you call policy personnel in the particular area. Maybe they simply take your phone in front of them. Then you try to tell them these people are taking my phone. They say go and open the case. That will delay the provision of public goods or services because of bureaucrats, the following rules and regulations beyond control. We talk about the lack of motivation. That's when public officials are not appreciated for the great job they are doing, but instead government officials keep on pinning them for wrongdoings. So in that situation, they tend to be demotivated and they become more inefficient because they see that they are not acknowledged for the great job that they are doing under public sector. And then discussing detailed reasons for the foreign trade, demand and supply reasons. This is where we talk about people in Witbank prefer coffee or rich countries like to send chocolate. How population size for demand side. So remember, the increase in population size increase the demand for goods and services, and then some of those goods and services are not produced locally, they are produced abroad. The increase in the level of income increase what we call income per capita, which also increase the demand for goods and services. So normally, rich people normally spend on demanding luxury goods and services that are produced abroad. And then we talk about increase in wealth. The increase in credit facility in the economy can result to people spending more on goods and services. As the wealth level increases, countries tend to spend more. Those that are more wealthy, they spend on luxury goods. Those that are poor, they spend on what we call on basic goods and services or necessities, which might be imported. Then we talk about preference and taste. We know that preferences differ from a person to person. So one person prefers something while other person prefers something else. That is because of the exposure on social media where we can see different things, and also the openness on online business where we can purchase anywhere. So that will lead to the demand for goods that are not even produced locally because of changes in lifestyle as well as international migration. Consumption patterns, they differ from a country to country and the person to person. Developed countries normally demand luxury goods. If they cannot produce them, they import them, while developing countries demand necessity goods, which if they cannot produce them, they import them from other countries. The other side, rich countries like to send chocolate. Natural resources, guys, are not evenly distributed across the world. Other countries are rich in some natural resources, others have nothing. So they have to be supplied. And then climate condition. Climate condition differ from a country to country based on what we call weather patterns. In that situation, the climate condition favors, if ever it favors your place, that means there will be more crop production of a certain nature, but some crops cannot grow because they are not favored. So one with the surplus production can supply those that are having less or nothing. And then labor resources, labor experts, we know that, well, developed countries have a skilled labor that is always producing at the high level of efficiency, and they're also producing at the economies of scale. In that situation, they always hold advantage over developing countries because they produce more and supply the rest of the world. And then technical level, well-developed countries are very much advanced in technology. They always adapt to the new technology at any time, which will give them an upper hand over developing countries. Then they always produce more goods and services and supply the rest of the world. Specialization, we know that countries always produce goods and services where they have an absolute advantage. So it allows them to specialize on goods that they are good on and ignore the rest, so they can be supplied. So if you are specializing, you tend to produce more and have surplus production to supply the rest of the world. Then capital. Developing countries are faced by an issue of poor capital. So they are always undermined by developed nations. Developed nations have more capital over developing countries, which allow them to produce and supply more goods and services. Those are reasons for the foreign trade. This is the essay structure. Introduction is 2 marks. You must just give a definition. You don't give examples or listing. And then we continue. We continue with the body. That's when now we deal with 26 marks in detail, where you answer the question in detail with your subheadings and explaining. Then you have your additional part in there where you must answer, providing at least 5 points in full sentences as facts to get 10 marks if they are correct. And then do not list, because should you list down there in additional part, you will only be getting 2 marks. And then conclusion is the higher order response, where you need to provide what you call your viewpoint, and then you synthesize, you evaluate, you link your intro, you link your main part to additional part in your conclusion to have informative conclusion. It's 2 marks. And then do not tell us that in this is I have discussed this and that. No, you simply become critical and authentic as you answer the question. Should be higher order response. Your essay is 40 marks. I don't have time. Let's see how to write an essay. You must arrange your essay in subheadings. Do not write paragraph. Remember IMAX strategy, like I mentioned before: intro, introduction, main part, additional, and conclusion. And then remember 8:18 principle, whereby listing headings is for 8 marks, and then discussing content is 18 marks. And then the content knowledge is 18 marks, like I've mentioned. And then we continue. How to write an essay. Be aware of listing in additional part. You can only get 2 marks if you are listing discuss in full sentences. Ensure that responses you provide are enough to score maximum marks, not just give 2 responses for about 10 marks. And then arrange your essay in point form. It's a repeat. Your conclusion should not have any repetition of either introduction, main part, or additional part. It must also be the higher order response. Here is the example of an essay discussing detailed markets within the 4-sector model in the economy. Remember, this is just an example. So this one was fortunate to be here. Otherwise, I've discussed all essays here that might appear in the exam, but we simply make one example of an essay. 26 marks. And then how do households contribute to building South African economy? Introduction, we define circular flow as the flow of model that explains the flow of goods, services, and money between participants in the economy, or you define the market if you feel like doing so, because it's still correct. And then the body, we deal with the main part in there. We talk about the factor market. Remember, that's a market where factors of production are traded, and then also it is known as an input or resources market. Firms and government buy factors of production such as labor, capital, entrepreneurship, and natural resources as real flow from household through this market. And then we continue with the factor market. All four factors of production are paid for. They're remunerated in the form of wages and salaries, interest, rent, profits, which is known as a money flow. The labor market is a component of this market where labor is traded. Then production cannot occur without factor market because it possesses all input that are important to be transformed to what we call to the output. Then we go to the second one, which is goods or product market. This is a market where goods and services are traded. And then the goods market is subdivided into consumer goods market, capital goods market, services market. Then we continue. I think there's a wrong listing. Marking there is 2 marks. Consumer goods market is the market where consumers buy their final goods and services to satisfy their needs and wants. It contains durable consumer goods, semi-durable, non-durable consumer goods. You can define these and give examples also. Then we continue. Capital goods market is the market where capital goods such as machinery and equipment are traded. Then we continue. The services market is a market where services are traded that include banking services, transport services, communication services, etc. And then the product market is not direct in volume production, but bring goods and services closer to consumers, as consumers cannot buy from the factory itself. They go to the nearby market to buy those goods and services. And then we continue to the financial market. So the financial market is the market where all financial securities are traded, and then it is the destination designed for investment, borrowings, and savings. Then we continue. The financial market contains insurance companies, commercial banks, the central bank, and JSE. So we are mixing them both before we divide them. Financial market is the main market for wealth creation in the economy, and then it enables the flow of money and capital between all economic participants. Then we continue. Financial market continues. Financial market is a source of capital for businesses and investors. Financial market act as a financial custodian in the economy. Then it is not directly involved in production, but act as a mediator between participants, because for household to get money, they go to the bank. For business to get money, they go to the bank. So it becomes a mediator. Financial markets are subdivided into money market as well as the capital market. Then we go to the money market. Remember, the money market is the market for what we call for short-term loans and deposit by the private sector. And then it is controlled. The banking sector, insurance, and the central bank are the main components of the money market. And then household, businesses, and government are the main participants in this market. Debentures, treasury bills, and government bonds are traded in this market. And then in South Africa, money market is controlled by South African Reserve Bank. We go to the capital market. Capital market is the market for long-term loans and deposit by the private sector. And then mortgage bonds are examples of the capital markets. And then Johannesburg Stock Exchange, JSE, is the key institution that controls what we call the capital market in South Africa. Shares are traded in the capital market. Then we go to the foreign exchange market. So the foreign exchange market is the market where different world trade currencies are traded for the exchange, for importation, debentures, as well as international traveling. These transactions occur in the financial market. Remember, they take place in banks, these transactions. The biggest foreign exchange markets in the world are in London, New York, and Tokyo. And then South African rand is freely exchanged in this market because we use the free floating exchange rate. We go to additional part. Households are the owners of production factors, namely labor, capital, entrepreneurship, as well as natural resources. Factors of production are sold by household, are converted to goods and services which contribute to the GDP creation in the economy. And then household earn income and pay personal income tax to the government, which is necessary for provision of public goods and services. And then we continue. Additional part continues. Household are the primary consumers of goods and services in the economy. And then also the increase in demand for goods and services by household increase the demand for labor and leads to job creation as well as economic growth. The purchase of consumer goods and services from the product market is accompanied by an indirect tax such as VAT, which positively contribute to the state revenues. And then household employed abroad and foreign currencies as they are remunerated for their factors of production that increase the country's national income. Any other correct and relevant response is given. A full sentence response and is for 10 marks. Then we go to the additional part. To the conclusion. Markets play a vital or important role in bringing consumers and producers together to make goods and services easily accessible. Any other conclusion may be accepted for 2 marks. Then your essay is for simply 40 marks. So that was your essay. And I, Mr. Mhlongo, thank you. And I wish you all the best for tomorrow. We'll meet again on Thursday where we prepare for paper 2. So ensure that you redeem yourself, prepare very well, and ensure that you pass in this June examination to get confidence going towards to the prelim.